The French Revolution tried to create both a political and social order. One of the main causes was the condition of the French society, based on inequality, as it was divided into three estates. The clergy was formed by members of aristocratic families who owned 10% of the land and were exempt from taxes. The nobility had the leading positions in the government, the military, the law courts, and the higher church offices. They owned 25 to 30% of the land and also were exempt from taxes. The commoners were divided by differences in occupation, level of education, and wealth. The peasants were the workers of the land. The skilled craftspeople and shopkeepers, and the bourgeoisie or middle class included bankers, lawyers, doctors, and writers. These members of the middle class were unhappy with the monarchical system. Food shortages, rising prices for food, and unemployment were the background of the French Revolution. The number of poor was estimated at 1/3 of the population. However, the government continued to spend enormous sums on costly wars and court luxuries, especially the Queen, Marie Antoinette, who was known for her extravagance. The Estates General was composed of members of the three orders of the society. Most members of the Third Estate wanted to set up a constitutional government that would abolish the tax exemptions of the clergy and the nobility. On June the 17th of 1789, the Third Estate called itself a National Assembly and decided to draft a constitution. But 3 days later, they arrived at the meeting to find the doors closed and had to declare the French constitution at a tennis court nearby. The king, Louis XVI, prepared to use force against the Third Estate, and on July the 14th, a group of Parisians stormed into the Bastille, an armory and state prison, in search for weapons, and dismantled it brick by brick. The fall of the Bastille saved the National Assembly. A vast panic spread quickly through France, and citizens, fearing invasion from foreigners supporting the monarchy, formed militias.
Because of peasants' revolts and fear of foreign troops, the National Assembly on August 4, 1789 voted to abolish the relics of feudalism and aristocratic privileges as the right of landlords and the financial privileges of nobles and the clergy. On August 6, 1789, the National Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, inspired by the American Declaration of Independence and Constitution and the English Bill of Rights. The Declaration proclaimed as right for all men and citizens freedom and equality, property, end to exceptions from taxation, freedom of communication of thoughts and opinion. This ideal of equal rights did not include women to exercise of political rights and functions. Meantime, Louis XVI was forced to accept the National Assembly abolition of feudalism and the Declaration of the Rights by a group of armed women who marched to Versailles because their children were starving. The royal family returned to Paris, where they became virtual prisoners to show the king's support of the National Assembly. Church reforms. The National Assembly sold and seized its lands. Bishops and priests were to be elected by the people and paid by the state. The French government now controlled the church, and many Catholics became enemies of the revolution. The Constitution of 1791 set up a limited monarchy. There could be a king, but a legislative assembly could make the laws. The assembly was formed by 745 representatives, and only male citizens over 25 who paid a specified amount in taxes could vote. By 1791, the old order had been destroyed. However, many people opposed the new order. Some European leaders began to fear that revolution would spread to their countries. The Legislative Assembly declared the war on Austria in 1792 because its rulers wanted to restore Louis XVI to full power. In August, a radical group in Paris, declaring themselves as a commune, organized a mob attack on the Royal Palace and Legislative Assembly. Members of the new Paris Commune took the king captive. They forced the Legislative Assembly to suspend the monarchy and call for a national convention to decide on the nation's future form of government. Power now passed from the Assembly to the Paris Commune. Many of its members called themselves as sans-culottes, ordinary patriots without fine clothes.
The Paris Commune forced the Legislative Assembly to call a national convention. In September 1792, the newly elected National Convention began its sessions. The convention was dominated by lawyers, professionals, and property owners. 2/3 of its deputies were under the age of 45. The National Convention's first major step on September 21st was to abolish the monarchy and establish a republic. The members split into factions. The Girondins represented the areas outside the cities, feared the radical nobles in Paris, and leaned towards keeping the king alive. The Mountain represented the interest of radicals in the city of Paris. The Mountain convinced the National Convention in 1793 on condemning Louis XVI to death. On January 21st, 1793, the king was beheaded on the guillotine. The execution of Louis XVI outraged the European royalty. Austria, Prussia, Spain, Portugal, Britain, and the Dutch Republic took up arms against France. To meet this crisis, the National Convention gave broad powers to a special committee of 12 known as the Committee of Public Safety. It was dominated at first by George Danton, then by Maximilien Robespierre. The Reign of Terror began. During the Reign of Terror, internal enemies were prosecuted. Close to 40,000 people were killed. 16,000 people, including Marie Antoinette and Olympe de Gouges, died under the blade of the guillotine. People from all classes were killed during the terror in order to bring rebellious cities back under the control of the National Convention. By spring 1793, the committee was sending representatives on missions to all parts of France to implement laws. Slavery was abolished in France's colonies. In less than a year, the French revolutionary government had raised a huge army. The Republic's army was the largest ever seen in European history. The revolutionary fervor began to cool. Churches reopened for public worship, and a new constitution was created in August 1795. The constitution established a national legislative assembly consisting of two chambers: Lower House, known as the Council of 500, which initiated legislation, and the Upper House, the Council of Elders, which accepted or rejected the proposed laws. The Council of Elders elected 5 directors to act as the executive committee or directory. To maintain its powers, the directory relied on the military. Napoleon Bonaparte, a successful and popular general, toppled the directory.
Napoleon Bonaparte built and lost an empire between 1799 and 1815. Napoleon was born in 1769 in Corsica. He was a son of nobility. He studied in a military school in France, and in 1785 he became an army officer in French army. In 1796 he became the commander of French army in Italy, where he won a series of victories. In 1797, Napoleon returned to France as a conquering hero. In 1799, Napoleon held absolute power with the new government. When he became consul, France was at war with a European coalition of Russia, Great Britain, and Austria. In 1801, Napoleon made an agreement with the Pope, where Catholicism is recognized as the religion of the majority of the French people. In 1802, Napoleon was made consul for life. 2 years later, crowned himself Emperor Napoleon I. From 1805 to 1807, Napoleon's great army defeated the Austrian, Prussian, and Russian armies. He had the opportunity to create a new European order. From 1807 to 1812, Napoleon was the master of Europe. The beginning of Napoleon's downfall came in 1812, when with his grand army he invaded Russia. At Waterloo in Belgium, on June the 18th of 1815, Napoleon suffered a bloody defeat, and he was exiled to St. Helena.